Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 3. Today, we're going to be talking about sleep and adolescence and kind of looking at the relationship between the two. The question that we're going to be working on today is: should schools change start times based on teen sleep needs and habits? So, we're going to kind of be tackling all of the things that affect teen sleep and then looking at the relationship of that with school start times and kind of thinking about ways that we can mitigate those two. So let's take a look at all of the key factors. There's a lot of things going on in teens' lives. We're talking about middle schoolers and high schoolers. Of course, school is kind of the most important to these kids at this time in their lives. Grades are super important, but there's a lot of other factors besides school that affect them. And some of these include friendships and relationships, especially during middle school and in adolescence. They're starting to break away from their parents and kind of looking to their peers and their friends for approval in society. And along with that, their body's going through changes as well. This can kind of bring on some sexual identity and figuring out certain relationships as well. I included sports to kind of encompass all of the different hobbies and activities that teens are involved in that are also such an important part of their lives. I know a lot of kids that are involved in sports, or perhaps it's that they do choir or play an instrument or theater or art, or there's just such a multitude of things that teens are learning what they like. And so that's also so important for them to discover, as well as jobs. A lot of teens have a lot on their plate, including working. So there's a lot of different factors that go into a teen's lives, and this all affects their sleep and their sleeping cycles. So the optimal sleep amount for adolescents is 9 to 9.25 hours per night, according to Mary A. Carskadon. And unfortunately, the amount of sleep that students have been getting is such an epidemic, not only in America, but around the world. With that 9 hours of sleep, only about 3% of teens are getting that, and the majority are getting around 7 or less hours of sleep. This means that teens are chronically sleep deprived, unfortunately, and this is kind of becoming a large issue. We're going to be considering a couple different things. So, teens at this time are going through biological changes in their adolescence, and can cause what is known as a phase delay, which calls for later sleep onset and wake times due to a shift in their circadian rhythms. So what this means is that there's ultimately going to be a change in their sleep cycle. Their biological clock is shifting so that there's so much going on in their lives. A lot of teens cannot fall asleep until 11 p.m. because their body doesn't start producing melatonin until that time. Melatonin is the chemical reaction in the brain that kind of cues your body that it's time to go to sleep. So if their body isn't able to relax and fall asleep until 11 p.m., this means that around 8 p.m. is their optimal wake time in order to get that full night of sleep. So it might be a lot more complicated than going to bed earlier, because a lot of students and teens at this age cannot just go to bed at that time. This is also in combination with a lot of distractions and alertness. A lot of students, because they can't go to bed until 11 p.m., they will stay up and maybe either do homework on their computers or play video games or watch TV. And this is also harmful to their sleeping cycle because they're getting that blue light interaction, and that can kind of delay sleep cycles and harm the production of melatonin, thus furthering back the time that they're able to fall asleep. So this, in combination with the early start times a lot of schools have, all of this combined is gonna equal sleep deprivation in teens. So we're gonna kind of look at some of the downsides of that. So in sleep deprivation, a lot of students are going to show signs of obesity or overweightness. This can also cause lower grades because students aren't being as focused in class because they're so tired. So this low energy also decreases athletic ability. We talked earlier about how important sports are and staying active for their body. It also affects their coordination too. So the sleep deprivation also causes a lot harder time regulating emotion. Teens are already going through such a change in their lives during this time. Their prefrontal cortex is developing, and that's where most adults make their rational decisions, is in their frontal cortex of their brain. However, teens and adolescents haven't fully developed this yet. So they're making decisions based on their pituitary glands and their emotional parts of their brain. That's why sometimes teens can act out emotionally, but it's not really their fault. It's their physical brain that's being affected by that. So when you're sleep deprived, this can make things even more difficult in terms of regulating emotion. That's why we see a lot of teens who are stressed or sad or depressed even because they're having trouble regulating emotion when they don't have the sleep to kind of help their brain develop. With all of this, unfortunately, a lot of students, in order to combat this sleep deprivation, will stay highly caffeinated, which isn't a good thing for their brain, or they'll perhaps turn to alcohol or drugs. And this is the number one cause for car accidents in teens, is either lack of sleep and that use of alcohol and drugs. On the other hand, if students are getting that 9+ hours of sleep that they need, we see an immense amount of increased brain development and memory. Kids have higher grades because they can stay focused in class. Not only that, but they have a better mood and they're healthy. They have a healthy body weight. Their immune system is healthy and ready to go, and their athletic ability is also increased. So the next thing we're going to look at is a couple of studies. This graphic here, this graph is from the Associations of Sleep Duration on school nights. And then students were self-rating themselves in overweightness, depression symptoms. This was a study done in East Asia. I wanted to pick a study that was not done in America because there are plenty of studies that have been done in America, but I wanted to do something just to show how this is an epidemic that's affecting us worldwide. So as you can see on the graph, if students are getting less than 5 hours of sleep, they rate their self-rated good health as a lower rate than if they get 9+ hours. We see a progression of students rating their health better if they get more amount of sleep. So that correlation is very strong. Here we see another physical manifestation of sleep deprivation and overweightness. So if adolescents are getting that 5 to 6 hour range, they have a much higher risk of being obese and overweight. There's also a lot of other studies that I looked at. I looked at a study that was talked about in an NPR article where in Seattle they changed the start times from 7:50 to 8:45 a.m. And the report of the feedback of that is that students had better attendance. They had more focus in class. They weren't as overweight. They had a reduction of absence and tardiness, and so it's decreased by 25% in one district, which is absolutely awesome. Now let's talk about some resolutions. So things that we can do to kind of help the situation. So one of the main things is just making sure pediatricians and healthcare professionals are readily providing education on this and support to adolescents. It's crazy to me that we have all of this information and yet it's still a problem worldwide that students are sleep deprived. So we want to make sure that those healthcare professionals, especially the ones that are in the schools, the nurses, the different doctors and pediatricians, are educating the parents, the other educators and athletic coaches that this is one of the most important aspects of teen life and adolescence. And then also getting their parents involved. Obviously, having a set bedtime isn't always the case. To go to bed earlier, that doesn't always solve the problem, especially when students aren't able to fall asleep until later at night. But maybe controlling the amount of media use they use at night. So that means that having a home media use plan, or maybe a media curfew in which students are not on their phone late at night so that they're able to produce that melatonin and not put a late onset on that even further. Let's kind of address some of the counter arguments. Some people will say that having the earlier start times kind of prepare the students for early mornings that accompany adulthood. It was kind of funny because I watched a TED Talk in which I linked in my sites, but I watched this TED Talk where Wendy Troxel kind of combats this exact counter argument and says telling a teen to wake up early to prepare them from adulthood is like telling a 2-year-old that they're not going to take a nap because they won't be ready for kindergarten. The body knows what it needs, and to kind of say that teens won't be prepared for adulthood is kind of silly, but that is one of the arguments people say. It can be refuted, but another thing is that if you delay the start times of schools, it kind of impacts sports and the bus times and kind of more logistical elements of school starting later, as well as before and after school care. I know school starting later kind of affects whether or not a parent has work at those times, but those are all things to consider in terms of if we should delay start times. So that's kind of all that I have in terms of what I found out about school and sleep. And I thought it was a really interesting project. Here are the works cited that I used. I'm really grateful that I was able to do this presentation and learn a little bit more about sleep and how it affects adolescents. So thank you so much for your attentiveness, and hope you guys have a great weekend.